Okay, perfect, everyone. So welcome to this edition of Hult's Thought Leadership webinar series, where we explore the hottest topic affecting society and business today. For those of you who are joining a Hult event for the first time, just a little bit of background about us. So basically, Hult have designed a school that looks to the future by focusing on developing your leadership skills, challenging you with a future-oriented curriculum, and building a global perspective that only first-hand experience can bring. We currently offer an undergraduate program, 5 specialist one-year master programs, a one-year global MBA, and a uniquely flexible part-time executive MBA. More information on our programs and the upcoming scholarship deadline can be found at hult.edu. So yeah, today we are joined here by Hult Professor Alessandro Lanteri to explore one of this year's hottest topics, is artificial intelligence and emerging technology. Before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping. So the webinar will last around 1 hour in total, and we will have time for questions at the end. And a recording of the webinar will also be sent out to everyone after the event. If you wish to ask questions, as I mentioned, please write them in the Q&A box in the bottom. It should be in your right-hand corner. And then we will put these questions to Alessandro at the end. So yeah, with no further ado, I would now like to hand over to Professor Alessandro Lanteri. So over to you, Alessandro.
Thank you very much, Therese. Thank you for the beautiful introduction. Welcome, everybody. I see that there's very many of you. And I noticed that one of you is also from Abu Dhabi. I'm also in Abu Dhabi right now. I hope you're already, I see a couple of people are still dialing in, but since we don't have a whole lot of time, and I'm a professor, so whenever you give me a slide set and some attention, I can talk for hours. So I'm gonna have to start, and then I'll make sure to leave a few minutes at the end so we can take some of your questions and have a little back and forth if time allows. All right, so let me see if I can share my presentation. All right, I think that you should now be able to see it. I will make this smaller, and this should go full screen. So very briefly, today we're going to talk about strategic drivers for the near future. And obviously it's my duty to explain to you what do I mean by both these things, strategic drivers and what is the near future. And we'll get there. This is me. You can see this photo was taken on a better day. I definitely looked more rested than I do today, but that's me. It's not an illusion. So I'm a professor of entrepreneurship at Hult, mostly in Dubai nowadays, but also in London. I write a column for the Harvard Business Review Arabia, so the regional edition in the Middle East. I work with a number of clients. So I work with governments, ministries largely, with multinationals. I work with international organizations like the UN. I work with the World Economic Forum. I work with I don't even remember so many. And I'm a speaker, so I talk about the topics that I'm interested in, namely innovation, emerging technologies, ethics, leadership, and the future. Or should I say the futures, because there's not only one future at any given time. But we'll get to that later. So I have this TEDx talk that came out about a year ago. And I've received an incredible number of views. It's like over 170,000. So it was really successful, and it talks about ethics and emerging technologies. So if you have time when you're done with this and you are not completely fed up, I will send you the slides with the link to it, or you can find it by looking at my name. All right, enough introductions. Let's start talking about today's topic. And I'll start by sharing with you. So I mentioned I live in Abu Dhabi, although I work mostly in our Dubai campus. So that's about 150 kilometers drive, give or take, just over 1 hour and a half drive. So let me show you what that means for us today. Today it means that if you look at these two cars, the one on the left, the ugly looking one, which was probably believed to be cool in the 80s, and a more stylish, more contemporary one, that's today's car. Look, if I was born in 1980, so if I had to drive my daily commute from Abu Dhabi to Dubai in 1980, it would take me approximately 20 liters of fuel. Driving it today with an average car, of course, it depends on the vehicle, the speed, whatever, but with an average car today, it only consumes 11 liters of fuel. Now, that means that we have experienced and we have observed an increase in fuel efficiency of approximately 45%. That's over 1% per year, which is pretty good, I guess. But we can't really say if something is pretty good unless we compare it with something else. So let me move on and compare another improvement so we can get a better sense of what we're talking about here. Right. So again, back in 1980, if I wanted to buy a personal computer, the best available on the market would have been the Apple II. Now, the Apple II didn't come with a hard drive. I know that for some of you, this would be a shock. What do you mean it didn't have a hard drive? Well, in fact, you could install a hard drive, but it would cost you the equivalent of 25,000 US dollars today. So yeah, pretty much no one had one. What did they have instead were floppy disks. And initially in 1980, they had the broader ones, the wider ones, so they were 5.25 inches. They were very thin and floppies, but they were really soft, so you could bend them. And they would use the reader you see in the image there. There is the bottom one, there is a floppy disk reader, the lower one, that's the broader, the wider and thicker one. Yeah, that's what was used back then. But now I'm gonna have to really shock you when I tell you about the storage capacity of these floppy disks. So one of those floppy disks initially was stored 160 kilobyte. Now you have no idea what that means, probably because it's a unit that we don't use anymore, because it's so tiny. Let me put that in perspective. If you wanted to record music on one of these floppy disks, and I'm not saying just any music, I'm saying high quality, compact disc quality music, you could store less than 1 second. I'm not kidding. 1 second of CD quality music is 176 kilobytes. And that floppy only could store 160 kilobytes. So let's jump to 2019. Take any smartphone from your pockets, my smartphone, just any average smartphone nowadays can store 17 days of high quality music. Now you see the jump is very substantial. In fact, the improvement in storage capacity in this time frame was 1.5 million times. Now compare that to 45%. Now 45% doesn't look so exciting anymore, does it? And the increase in the storage capacity, to be honest, is just one of the shocking features. Now look at the size. Look at the size of that floppy disk reader alone. Now, if you were to open my phone, if I challenge you to open my phone and find the floppy disk in it, find the hard drive in it, I guess many of you would not see it. You would not know where to look for it because it's so tiny. And the size has also decreased enormously. But the most striking, or another striking feature, is price. How much does a hard drive on my phone cost nowadays? Truth be told, I have no idea. And I have no idea because I don't need to buy one. In fact, when I buy a phone for $500, give or take, it comes with one drive already in it. So it's part of the package. I don't even have to price it separately because it's now so cheap that it's all part of the package. Now, compare these two progresses. So a car and its fuel efficiency has improved very, very steadily and substantially, but the storage capacity of a hard drive has improved in a much, much faster way. It's an entirely different scale. So what we're going to talk about today is technologies such as hard drives. And these technologies are what we call digital technologies. What they have in common is that they all tend to improve at the same speed. This gentleman here, his name is Ray Kurzweil. He's a futurologist, and I think he's been the director of engineering at Google for now probably 6-7 years. And he has identified what he calls the law of accelerating returns. So the price, the performance, and the capacity of any digital technology progresses at a predictable rate. And this rate is exponential. Pretty much what we've seen with storage capacity of hard drives. What does it mean? Well, what that means is that the two trajectories of improvements between exponential and linear technologies look very different. And they look very different, but they also feel very different to us. We don't entirely get what exponential means. And I'm going to prove that to you by means of a small example. So let's think in terms of linear progress. Now, linear progress means that the progress is pretty much always the same. So it's what you saw with this fuel efficiency. We said that it improved approximately 1%, starting from the baseline year, yeah, approximately 1% per year. So you see the improvement goes in a predictable, stable way. And you can also imagine something like that happening, say, if you take 30 steps, each step is 1 meter. It means that if you take 2 steps, you'll end up 2 meters away, 7 steps, 7 meters away, 30 steps, 30 meters away, and so on. So you know exactly where you'll be at each point in time. And in fact, you can easily probably even visualize where that is. Where is 30 meters away from where you are now? So for me, I'm in an office now, so you know that 30 meters away is somewhere down the hallway. It's by the elevator. But I'm pretty sure for you it will be outside your room or downstairs or in the entrance or whatever. But it's very clear your brain grasps it and you know what to do with this type of change. Now, when we talk about exponential transitions and exponential growths, our brain struggles to keep up. If we were to take steps, like 30 steps, the double every time. So the first step is 1 meter. The second one is 2 meters. The third one is 4, and then 8, and then so on. What happens is that pretty soon, by the time we've taken 30 steps, we'll have gone nowhere where you can envision. In fact, no one of us really grasps what that means. But after 30 steps, we will have gone around the planet several times. That's very difficult to grasp. It's very difficult to make decisions when you don't understand this gap. And just to give you a further example of what that means, I want to use another digital technology that you'd be familiar with. Let's talk about digital cameras. Now, digital cameras were launched, introduced, developed initially, say the mid to late 60s, say 76, 78, something like that. The first digital camera was a 3-kilo piece of metal. It was absolutely non-portable. It took almost 30 seconds to take a photo. The photo, of course, was black and white, and it could only be stored on a plastic, one of those cassettes that we used until the 90s to record music on, because that was the only support available, widely available for digital data. So after taking this 30 seconds to take a photo with this bulky, heavy machine, and recording the photo, black and white, or this plastic cassette, then you would have to put the cassette in the cassette reader, connect it to a very expensive computer, and then connect that to a TV to see your photo. So not very user-friendly. But the most shocking part of it all is, what was the resolution of that first digital photo? So I'm gonna express this in terms of megapixels. So that's the unit we use nowadays. So that first camera had a resolution of 0.01 megapixels, which is terrible. It's like really, really bad. You don't even know what you're looking at. Yet, because it's a digital technology and it follows the law of accelerating returns, pretty soon, after a couple of years, 1 year, 1 year and a half, 18 months, 2 years, whatever, the resolution will have doubled. And then again, and then again, and then again. But what does that mean in practice? It means, let's say you're the manager of a company and your chief engineer comes to you and says, look, this is our first prototype of digital photography. Resolution is 0.01 megapixels. We know it's not very good, but let us go back to the lab and we'll make it better. Fine. The head engineer comes back 2 years later, and sure enough, the resolution is now doubled. But once it's doubled, it is now 0.02 megapixels, which is still pretty awful. So you send him back to the lab and say, you need to work on this a bit longer. Comes back 2 years later, and now it has doubled again, and it's now 0.04 megapixels, which is still pretty close to zero. I mean, the resolution is still terrible. So you say, what have you been doing these last 4, 6 years? Go back. And he comes back 2 years later, it's now 0.08, and then it's 0.16. And I mean, you get it, right? You don't see any progress. It's so bad, just so bad. After a decade, you can barely see any improvement. So you don't get it, and you will say, this is a terrible idea, let's kill it. However, there comes a moment where the doubling and doubling and doubling of the resolution gets the resolution close enough to the quality and the resolution of analogic photography. The ones that were developed, recorded on films, and then the film would be developed, and you had these hard copies of the photos. These are the photos that you were probably familiar with when you were kids. And by the time the resolution gets to be close enough for it to be comparable to the analogic technology, the analogic technology is doomed to disappear. It's doomed to succumb in the competition, because the analogic technology will keep growing and improving at a linear pace, but the digital one will keep growing at an exponential pace. So what happens? You see this in the graph there, right? So you see that there is an initial stage of progress and development of this technology where you don't really appreciate the speed of the improvement. We call this the deceptive growth stage, because when people look at it, they will think, not so great. Then there's a moment that we often call the iPhone moment, when the technology becomes good enough for widespread adoption. And people start loving it because it has some features that make it more handy, more user-friendly. You can take more photos, share them easily, and so on. But then there's a moment after that of true, genuine, disruptive growth, where people are left pretty much speechless at the potential of this technology. So if you see me looking away, as I'm doing now, it's just because I want to keep an eye on the time. I don't want to run too late, as I usually do. So back to these technologies and the difference between the two. So the thing is, nowadays we are capable of manufacturing cameras that have a resolution of 400 megapixels. And 400 megapixels is, I don't know, it's just a resolution that's so wide, so big, so amazing that I don't even know what that means. Probably you can take fairly accurate photos of faraway planets. I really, honestly, I have no idea how good that is. But it's not only a matter of resolution. It's also a matter of size and price again. So at some point, for digital photography, the moment when this iPhone moment, so the moment when the resolution was good enough to compete with analogic technologies, was sometimes in the 90s. I'm sure mid 90s. By mid 90s, everybody had seen, was familiar with the idea of digital cameras. And digital cameras were not around very long because, as we said, the speed of improvement is so staggering that the cameras kept becoming smaller and smaller, cheaper and cheaper, and soon enough, digital cameras were no longer competitive because cameras could be installed on telephones, like smartphones. In fact, my smartphone has 3 cameras nowadays, and they are like 5, 6, 8 megapixels, things like that. So that also once again reiterates the concept of how cheap this technology has become. How much do these cameras cost? Honestly, I have no idea. I bought my phone and they gave me 3 cameras that came with it. So once again, the increase in the performance, the increase in the decrease in size and decrease in price are really, really, really fast. And not understanding this is a big failure. Prevents you from looking into the future. And we'll get back to this point later. Now, let's look at what happens to digital technologies that grow exponentially. What are the 6 important things that we need to identify and understand when we talk about this technology? So there are 3 initial phases. The first phase is when an analogic technology becomes digitized. And this has happened, of course, with text, with videos, with sound, with images, what have you. So what happens in practice is that these technologies stop having a very substantial physical manifestation, and they start being converted into code. Code means ones and zeros, right? When that happens, the second phase is the phase of deceptive growth. Growth is really fast, but we don't get it. We are disappointed at the growth because we don't see the improvement, because the starting point is typically very low. But past the iPhone moment, or the critical point in this graph, this exponential growth turns into amazing performances, into pure amazement and pure disruption. This is what we've seen so far. Let's look at what are the consequences of these 3 phases. So the first thing is that because the technology is now digital, so represented by ones and zeros in a code, it loses its physical manifestation. So the physics of technology changes. These technologies become dematerialized. I'm going to show you a quick video about it because I find that very, very cute and very, very clear. Here it goes. Nice, huh? I guess that, so the video ends in 2014. I think if they were to continue it and project it until now, I think that this big bulky laptop will now be gone, and almost everything will be on the phone. And if we wait just a little longer, the phone itself will be gone, and everything will probably be on the glasses. This is the trend we're observing. So augmented and virtual reality, or mixed reality, are the new computing interface and the new standard of computing interface that we expect to emerge really powerfully over the next 10 years. And so what you would observe there is that every interaction with technology will no longer be mediated by a keyboard, as happened on the laptop. It would not happen through a screen. Both of these are two-dimensional technologies. So what will happen soon is that we will be immersed in technology. We have a three-dimensional immersive experience. Some people call this conversational computing or interfaces. And many of you will have experienced something like that. For example, when you talk to Siri or Cortana, or so you instead of typing or touching a screen, you already communicate verbally with your computer. And maybe some of you will have played Pokemon Go. So that's another example of how augmented reality is changing the way we interact with digital data. We'll come back briefly to this point later. I want now to jump back to the 60s. So we're talking about the fact that the physics of technology and technological progress changes. So we are at the fourth stage where we dematerialize. But when you change the physics of technology, you also change the economics of it. So how much does making a mobile phone cost? I don't know, really. I think it's about $100, give or take. Let's take that reference as a reference value. Making an iPhone costs approximately that amount. So let's use that. So if you want to make two phones, it's probably going to cost you $200, just maybe a little less, but ballpark figures, it's going to be $200. If you want to make three, it's going to cost $300, and $400, $500, and so on. When you want to duplicate a digital technology and make additional copies of it, that's not true anymore. Every digital technology can be duplicated, or actually replicated infinite times, for free and instantaneously, and the performance will be exactly identical. And when you change that, when that happens, so the economics of these technologies change, and these technologies become demonetized. That's what I've been saying all along. So my phone today has cameras, GPS, computing power. I mean, all of the technology in my phone today would have cost you $1 million in the 1980s. I'm not kidding. So this is an estimate. In fact, between 1980 and 2016, we've managed to pack $1 million worth of technology into a portable, affordable mobile phone that almost everybody has. In fact, I'm now talking to you, and as I talk to you, I know that each one of you has $1 million worth of technology in their pockets. And if I had asked this question in the 1980s, how do we put $1 million worth of technology in everybody's pocket? People would have laughed at me. But the last stage, last D of the 6 Ds of exponential technologies is that when something becomes so cheap, it becomes democratized, which means everybody has one. Now, I'm going to show you the next slide is where is it? Here. These are the latest data on mobile penetration worldwide. And until a few years ago, this slide, this image would pretty much show that in a simplistic way, we can say that every human being on the planet has one mobile phone. That's not necessarily a smartphone, but a mobile phone at least. Now, today, that's no longer true. I think that today we have to say that every human being on the planet has, on average, more than one mobile phone in their pocket. So this would have been absolutely unimaginable back in the 80s. And what happens when everybody carries $1 million worth of technology in their pocket is nothing short of a revolution. In fact, the world is bound to change and keep changing extremely fast because of it. And nowadays, none of us questions that everybody's carrying that kind of technology in their pocket. But as we said, in the 80s, that would have been absolutely unimaginable. Some of the technologies we carry in our pockets in the 80s were not even available to the public. Think about the GPS. How many of you have a GPS? How many of you have more than one GPS? You know, some of you will have a GPS in your smartwatch. Definitely you have one in your smartphone. Many of you will have it in your car. So say the average person I'm speaking to tonight has 3 GPSs. Once again, where is the GPS? If you open your phone, you will not find it because it's so tiny now. In the 80s, a GPS would have been a tall radar tower installed just outside a military compound because only the army had access to it. Nowadays, everybody has it. And again, how much does it cost? I don't know. It just comes with the phone. So when that happens, entirely new business models and ways of running business become possible. Some of them might seem stupid or silly. Some of them are truly astonishing. I'll give you a quick couple of examples. So one of them is you can now call a taxi in a way that's so accurate, thanks to your GPS, that the taxi is going to come and pick you up on the right side of the street. So when I was a kid, if you wanted to call a taxi, you had to call to phone the operator, and the operator would then send a radio message out, and then people would come somewhere more or less close to an address. And if you're very lucky, they will come and get you 15, 20 minutes. Nowadays, it's instantaneous. They send the signal with extreme clarity. But I want to give you another example, which would have been quite silly when you imagine it if you thought about it in the 80s. But let's imagine it just to make this exercise. So imagine it's the 80s, it's 1980. I want to take a photo with a group of people. In fact, I would, if you were with me in my room, in the same in a classroom, then I would take a photo of all of you. And then I would like to try, 3 or 4 different filters just to make sure that the photo looks really nice. And when I'm sure that the photo looks really nice, I want to make sure that every person on the photo is identified and the location where the photo was taken is also identified. I then want to make sure that this photo is shared with at least one person each of you knows, but who's not in the country. And then I want to make sure that as soon as this person sees the photo, I am informed about it, but then I want the photo to be permanently destroyed. Now imagine doing all that in the 80s. I don't even know if it would have been reasonable to imagine such a thing. But if you wanted to really do it, it would definitely take months and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it would be just silly to imagine. Think about today. Today you can do it. It takes 1 second and it's free. So it's not only about the change in the technology, it's not about the access to technology, it's about the number of things that become possible and that everybody takes for granted nowadays. Imagine what things will be taken for granted 20 years from now. So I want to go back to my earlier example about the fuel efficiency of my car. So I told you that the fuel efficiency of our cars has improved 45%. Now imagine what if it had improved 1.5 million times. So at the same speed as my phone. Now that will never happen because burning fuel is limited by the laws of thermodynamics. But besides that, there are certain physical laws that regulate that. However, imagine what if fuel efficiency had improved 1.5 million times. Now, how much fuel would it take me to drive to work? Not 20 liters, not 11, probably a single drop or less. So what happens to gas stations? Well, gas stations, they will be gone. So probably, when I go to get my maintenance in my car once a year, the mechanic will check the brakes, change the oil, add a bit of fuel, and that will be enough for the whole year. But then what happens if that's the case? How much does it cost me to drive? Pretty close to nothing. So the industries that are affected by the cost of driving would immediately change. Think about logistics. What if logistics became much, much cheaper? If logistics became much, much cheaper, then also manufacturing would change, because now it would make sense to have one massive, huge factory somewhere where we make all the goods, have massive efficiencies, economies of scale, and so on. And then when we're done manufacturing, we can ship the goods wherever we want, very cheaply. And so what happens to the workers? Well, the workers will all relocate and go and live close to these mega factories. So anyway, this will not happen. We all understand that, but it doesn't matter, because what I want to say is that if one technology improved so fast, one of the technologies we know now has improved so fast, in a matter of few years, our lifestyles would change, our economy would be completely transformed, the way we manufacture goods and create value would be changed, and even the look of the planet and cities and social organization would change. Now, imagine what if many technologies improved precisely at that speed, all at the same time. And this is what's happening now. All of the digital technologies that we know are doing precisely that. Artificial intelligence is one, robotics, 3D printing, sustainable energy, communication, nanotechnology, biotech, and all that. They're all improving at that speed. And what do you think will happen then? Nothing short of a revolution, once again. In fact, this is the revolution we are experiencing right now. It's called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So that concludes the first part of our talk. I'm going to now enter the second part. The second part is much faster, actually, so I may still make it on time. I'll try to finish in about 10 minutes, so we have time for a couple of questions. And I want to start with a question. The question is, when does the future begin? And when does the past begin? And then we'll talk a little bit about the main changes in the economic system right now, and then we'll move on to the conclusion. So the question, when does the future begin and when does the past begin, is actually quite important when you look at how we make decisions. I'm going to show you this little model. It's a scheme. It's a way of looking at time and strategic fit of different business models or technologies. So time is on the horizontal axis, and it's divided into three big moments. The first moment is now in the immediate near future. So it's now in the next year or two. The second part, the transition time, we call it Horizon 2 sometimes, it's the midterm future. there is no clear starting or finishing time, but you can somewhere, just as a reference, it's probably something between 5 to 10, 15 years into the future. And then we have the distant future. It's something that will happen in what we call horizon 3. So it's when we talk about the future as a very remote time, that's what we mean. So maybe it's 20 years from now, something like that. What you see on the vertical axis is the extent of strategic fit. So how successful a business model or a technology is. And you see there is a black line. This black line describes the business models and the technologies that are very successful today. But after a few more years of success, these technologies will slowly fade away. So the laptop is probably going to disappear. Desktop computers are pretty much on their way out already. Then quite soon enough, also mobile phones will disappear, and some of these technologies will, or these the components of these technologies will still survive. So you see the line does not go all the way down, but they will be considered a bit obsolete. Then you see the dashed line. So this line suggests that there are business models and technologies that are okay now. Some of them, they're a bit marginal probably, but they are quickly getting more valuable and successful. And then in the near-term future, the mid-term future, in the transition time, they will be successful and viable, and then they will start declining. And then you have the third line at the bottom. These are very, these are fringe, marginal, extreme applications of certain technologies and ideas that are not really mainstream today. They will not be mainstream in the near future, but in the long time, in the distant future, they will be absolutely dominant. So what are these things and what can we do with it? Well, let's think about, general artificial intelligence capable of making like any type of intelligent decision, a bit like man can already. So when you talk to experts or even non-experts and you ask them, all right, so when is this technology going to be available? They say, well, in the future, it will be available for sure. Say, okay, so is it going to be available in 5 years? They don't know. I ask them, is it going to be available in 9 years? And they say, well, I don't really know. 10, 15, they don't know. But they are absolutely certain that this technology will absolutely be available in the future. So in Horizon 3. All right, so let's talk about another technology, autonomous vehicles, same story. Everybody is absolutely certain that in the third horizon, this technology will be available, widely available. But they don't know about the second horizon. So let me cut this short. What I want to say here is that we are much more comfortable and confident making predictions for a distant future rather than intermediate future. And not being able to make predictions makes it difficult to make decisions. So if you don't know what's going to happen during this transition time, how do you make decisions? Well, you are frozen, you make mistakes. But if you know what happens in the future, then what about we stop thinking about transition time or second horizon as the future, and we start looking at it as the past. What do I mean by it? Well, put yourself in the third horizon, so the future time. In the third horizon, there will be many technologies that you're comfortable predicting. You're confident they will be there. So general artificial intelligence will be there, autonomous vehicles, renewable energies, 3D printing, you name it. All right, so when you are in that moment in time, the transition or the second horizon will be your immediate past. So look back and ask yourself, what would have to happen during the transition time so that the future time is as I predicted? And that changes entirely the way you look at the future. So your near-term future, this transition time, is probably best described as the past of the remote future, because doing so allows you to make entirely new strategic decisions. So that's what I mean when I say that this topic is about the near-term future. Okay, so that's how do you make decisions for that time, that moment in time, based on what you believe will happen later on. Let me move on. I'm going to move on and say, how much time do I have? No time, so I'm going to skip this one. I'm going to start describing a couple of things that are happening in Industry 4.0. I'm going to ask you. I have a quiz for you, very easy, but I want to have your answers. So if you're with me, get to the chat, and I'll ask you a couple of questions. So the first question is, Tesla is disrupting which industry or which market? The first one, A, cars, B, energy storage, C, trucks, D, all of the above. So let me see if I reduce this chat. D, all of the above, D. Some of you says energy storage, but I think that most of you agree that Tesla is disrupting all of these technologies. Let me go on with the second question. The second question is, what is Airbnb disrupting? Sorry about, what is Airbnb disrupting? Hospitality, experiences, restaurants, or all of the above? I see a number of these again. D. Not surprised. Okay, last one. What about Uber? What is Uber disrupting? Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure you get it. This was a bit of a... I was not really looking for an answer here. I was mostly challenging you to think about what do industries mean nowadays. And the concept of an industry is becoming obsolete, because you have these new companies, like Tesla is a bit older maybe, but Airbnb and Uber are approximately 10 years old. And these companies, they don't think in terms of industry anymore. You will see them cutting through irrespectively and go wherever they can create value. So I don't think I know any taxi company or private driver company that has entered the post and parcels industry or the food delivery, but Uber does because they don't care. The second big trend is that industrial scale, which used to be a very strong competitive advantage, is now no longer so, because now industrial scale can be rented. So if you're Apple, you make hundreds of millions of gadgets every year. In fact, you don't have to have manufacturers and manufacture it yourself. Most of the gadgets are made by Foxconn, which is a supplier. Now, the moment Foxconn becomes your main supplier for actually physical devices, what that means is that if another competitor would enter the market, or even if I wanted to enter the market, I could probably go to Foxconn and have Foxconn manufacture my phones as well, my devices and gadgets. So the ability to manufacture physical goods is no longer a competitive advantage, because industrial scale is available for rent. And once I make my own gadgets and devices, say I make 10 million mobile phones, how do I sell them? Well, in the past, I would have to open shops, strike deals with chains of technological, mobile operators and what have you, all over the world. And this would be super expensive and time consuming. But nowadays, I mean, I can use UPS or FedEx to distribute my goods. So even the distribution of goods, which once used to be a source of competitive advantage, can now be rented. And the third big industry trend is that nowadays the largest source of value creation, so what powers the creation of value, is no longer oil, partly because the value of manufacturing and physical goods is fading away, being replaced by digital technologies. So data is the fuel that powers digital technology. And the amount of data we're dealing with is staggering. This is an example from Walmart. Walmart is collecting data in a massive scale. So I don't know if you are familiar with what a filing cabinet is. I have one here in the office. I won't show it to you, but you have some notion of how these things work. So Walmart collects data equivalent to 500 million of these filing cabinets every hour. So the amount of data they collect allows them to make decisions that are entirely new and different, and they create enormous, and they are enormous sources of value. It's possible to analyze this data. I'm sorry, I'm going to skip a couple of slides because I'm really, really late. I want to point out these other trends. These are not industry trends, they're digital trends. These digital trends mean that the relation between the physical and digital world is completely changing. Why? Because now we can gather data from the physical world really fast and much better, so we can know more. We have Internet of Things, we have better sensors, cheaper ones, we can process a lot of data, transmit it easily, and so on. And then once we have this data from the physical world, which become digital, we can manipulate them and understand them, make decisions about them as if they were digital, because that's what they are. And so here is where big data analytic techniques and machine learning, or artificial intelligence in short, come in handy. So once we manipulate this digital data, we can then transfer them back to the physical world through 3D printing and robotics and so on. So what's happening here really is that the relationship between the digital and the physical world is changing. It's becoming more integrated. And once that happens, many of the things that happen in the physical world will also change at an exponential rate, like digital technologies do, as we discussed earlier today. Okay, so this is Jeff Immelt, the former CEO of General Electric. I'm not going to say that everything is done in his company should be praised, but he was keenly aware of the fact that if you believe, or you used to believe, that you are an industrial company, stop believing that, because tomorrow you wake up and you'll be a software and analytics company. And I just explained to you why. These are the industry and digital trends that explain that. So let me come to a conclusion. What do you do? How do you deal with these changes in this digital era, or the near-term future, as you wish, or the fourth industrial revolution? These are all generally treated as synonyms. They refer to slightly different concepts, but the main questions are the same. So how do you succeed in this time? Now, well, the answer is in my book. So read my book, although I have not finished it yet. So my book will probably come out sometimes in the spring. And you will find it when it does come out, but I want to give you a preview of what's the answer. I don't want to leave you there hanging. So I've done a lot of research, academic research, because that's what I do. I'm a professor, but I've spoken with many managers, executives, investors in different industries, and I've identified what are the 6 core drivers to make strategic decisions in the near-term future, and I packaged all of them into a framework, and this framework pretty much has 6 drivers. So the framework itself is called CLEVER, but each letter, it's an acronym, and each letter refers to something different. So collaborative intelligence refers to the combination of multiple skills in an intelligent way, so that you can achieve outcomes that would be impossible if you had the skills separately. So the simplest example is the combination of humans and technology, humans and machines, humans and robots. How can you make them collaborate to create additional value? L means learning systems. So here we're talking about what many people refer to as artificial intelligence. Now, my personal feeling is that there is not a lot of intelligence in AI, but there's a lot of learning in a technical, biological sense. And that's why I call these learning systems. I think that the fact they learn is much more interesting than the fact they're intelligent, from a strategic perspective, especially. E, exponential technologies, that's what we discussed at the beginning. So talking about digital technologies growing at an exponential rate. V, So the first three letters, CLE, they talk about features of the hardware, of the technology per se. VER, the next three letters are more about the soft side of things, so more about business models and decisions and so on. So value facilitation refers to platform business models. So business models where companies do not create value per se, but they facilitate value creation. So when you catch an Uber, the value is created between you and the driver. You pay the driver rides you. Uber doesn't do any of that. Uber just makes that very easy. So that's value facilitation. And nowadays, 5 of the 10 largest companies by capitalization in the world operate such business model in one way or another. Ethical championship. I'm so sorry I don't have time to go into this, but it's critical, having a positive impact on society and creating value beyond financial value, and stop making long-term plans that cannot change. This is, sorry, I'm already moving to the R. You have to make decisions in a responsive way because the world changes really, really fast around us nowadays, and that's a better way to make decisions. Now, let me shut up. Sorry, I went a bit long, but thank you very much for your attention. And I love talking about these things. So let me thank you for being here. So I think that we still have just very, very short time. It's not much, but we have time for a couple of questions if you're interested. So can I ask you to type in the Q&A box? I see that there's a couple of questions about the model. Now, I am not sure that I understand. So if the model was a question about my book, so my model, my framework, I think I just presented it. And if I didn't, then please text me again to clarify the question. I also have a question here. There's went to so much automation. How do you see the human involvement in so many current days jobs? And so two things. I could have mentioned that earlier. I did not, but let me mention it now. I don't know the future, and no one knows or can know the future, because the future does not exist. And so you can't know something that doesn't exist. However, you can work with the future and use techniques to understand how the future happens so that you learn from the future. And what we learn by looking into the future, but also we learn these things by looking from the past, is really what I describe as collaborative intelligence. So by collaborative intelligence, I really mean that there are systems to combine different skill sets in such a way that they create more value together than they could separately. And I'm going to share with you a couple of other things that I've done. There is a very short 2-minute clip that I recorded recently that discusses collaborative intelligence, and I think it gives you a better understanding of what that means. But the concept here is machines cannot and should not replace humans. They should, because machines and robots have amazing skills, but they don't have all and exactly the same skills as humans have. So the clever thing to do here is find a division of labor that works in such a way where machines and humans each do what they can do best, and each make each other better. So humans give superpowers to robots, and robots give superpowers to humans. So that's the goal. Where do I see quantum computing taking us in the future? I'm actually truly sorry. I don't know. Again, do I see it growing exponentially? Yes. Will it happen soon? No, not soon. Probably not before 15 years in a very substantial way. I think that this also addresses the question that Carmelo is asking. So the speed of change in a technological category doesn't mean that the exponential growth will continue forever. What happens typically is that the exponential growth is S-shaped. So it's flat at the beginning, like what we call the deceptive growth stage. Then it goes up really fast through the so first it is deceptive, the second one is disruptive, and then it does plateau. But when it plateaus, what usually happens is that a new paradigm or a new technology standard jumps in, and that one also starts growing exponentially. And so although individual technologies do plateau, as a whole, the overall technology family doesn't really plateau. And if it does look like it's plateauing, it may still be replaced by a new technology that will have a jump start. So the long-term trend that we see in digital technologies, at least so far, I mean, it's not like we have a very long experience dealing with these things, but that this is the best sense we can make of what we observe at the moment. How long until am I skipping anything? Which way do you see business will change in the future? So one of the things I will see, okay, Vanessa, yeah. So one of the things that I see as a big trend, again, I don't know the future, but one of the big things I see is that we are going away from the notion that companies make products or services. And that's also why Uber can operate in so many different industries, because they are not about the technology, they're not about the service, they're not about the product, they're about meeting certain needs of certain users. And when you start thinking of yourself as a company as meeting specific needs of specific users, everything changes. So think about, I mean, this is a very obvious and silly example, but I still want to share with you. So I mean, when I was a kid, everybody would carry around a newspaper, and there were many newspaper companies, and many of them are now bankrupt or substantially decreased their operations, and many journalists lost their jobs and so on. And the main reason is because they thought of themselves as newspaper companies. But no one cares for newspapers. People don't buy newspapers. People buy news. People have a need to be updated. And that is still there. It has never gone away. So how come so many companies are out of business despite the fact that the basic need of the customer has remained unchanged? It's because they never tried to meet explicitly, yeah, I'm simplifying things a bit, but they were not trying to meet that need. They were trying to print newspapers. And that's an entirely different way of looking at your business. So I think that that's the first thing that will change. Another thing that will probably change is that companies will become looser. So we will have less monolithic companies. We already see that in innovation. So if you look at who is developing new driverless cars, there is not a single company doing that. It's all consortia. Consortia means that you have a tech company, you have a car maker, you have a car component maker, you have a university, you have a lab, you have this, you have that. Anyway, long story short, no one does it alone. There's an increasing trend towards that. The other thing is that companies tend to become platforms, so to manage networks where different users create value for each other by sharing resources when available or providing services directly when available. And the other thing is that I think that companies that exist exclusively to make money no matter what, they will slowly but surely, and this is as much a prediction as it is a wish, they will slowly lose their license to operate. Society will not tolerate that anymore, because the influence and the power of business in our society is unimaginable. And society and mankind as a whole really allows business to have such kind of power only when it's on average beneficial to everyone. But if this is no longer beneficial, then something else has to change. And I think that this is the biggest correction we're looking at in the near future. Sorry, this answer took forever. Sorry, Vanessa, I hope I answered your question. Sanaz, I think we have to consider the vanishing of legal barriers we face nowadays. Most of the time, wonder about how we're going to tackle the legal barriers. I'm not entirely sure I understand what we mean. So legal barriers means boundaries between countries that allow or don't allow trade, I believe, or the speed at which the law keeps up with these technologies. Sana, sorry, can I ask you to please elaborate a little bit on the question? I will, in the meantime, there is another question here. See much of agile involved. What about project management in the future? Look, there is a lot of agile, but look, my understanding is that we need to get better at handling change, managing, understanding change, first of all, and responding to change and manage change. And my understanding is that we're not really good at it. We tend to embrace stability. We enjoy and love stability, most of us, many of us. So agile is just one way of coping with the fact that we don't understand change. So, and that's what I call responsive decision making. So we make decisions that respond to change because we don't predict accurately enough. Should we become able to predict long-term or even mid-term events and changes, maybe using artificial intelligence, then we would not need to be responsive as much as we are today, or in the near future at least. So if in the long term we develop better techniques for forecasting and prediction, then I guess there would be less of a need for agile decision making. However, my belief is that we're not only talking about the speed of change, because the speed of change, whether it is constant or it accelerates or exponentially, it doesn't matter. That's still something that you can predict with the right data and the right tools and so on. What really affects us today is the unpredictability. So it's the complexity of the system. When a system becomes complex, you can't predict its behavior or its outputs and its outcomes. So think about what caused the 2008 financial crisis. It was, I'm making this sound simpler than it is, and probably it's unfair to say so, but it's a combination of different, laxer standards in the regulation in finance, a political pressure to make sure that the American dream could be lived and everybody could have a house, this and that. But then at the end of the day, there was a guy in a bank somewhere in the Midwest who approved a mortgage for someone who could not afford it really. And these happened multiple times, like hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of times. And all these little micro events together, but it still happened somewhere in the US, eventually affected every single other country in the world. And now this is something that to me seems pretty much unimaginable and unpredictable and untraceable. And there's no amount of data we can put together and no amount of machine learning we can put together to predict. So the complexity of our system, in fact, the increasing complexity of our economic systems will make them more unpredictable and faster changing. This is my understanding of the world. So because of it, I believe that we will need to become more nimble and more agile and respond much faster to change. I don't know if we still have time. I think, yeah, I see that. I think I've been scolded for being too long. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you so much for that, Alessandro. That was really insightful. And thank you everyone else for joining. I'm afraid we have run a little bit over, but that's completely fine. We love your questions. But as we said before, a recording of this will also be sent out in the follow-up email over the next few days. But if you would like to know more on our courses or about Hult, please visit our website at hult.edu. I also want to let you know about our next webinar in our Thought Leadership webinar series, which will take place on the 13th of March. And the topic is family business and is hosted by Professor Bill Carroll. But that's all from us today. And Alessandro, thank you so much for your time. It's been super interesting. And yeah, thank you everyone else for joining, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you, Alessandro.
Thank you.